As we move into chapter 50 and chapter 51, we're actually going to talk about the African American influence in American music. And the spiritual seems to be kind of the first and the mightiest of our influences. I was personally quite influenced by the spiritual growing up in the South. There were a lot of gospel singers growing up in Memphis, where I got to hear some really great spiritual music. So it is reminiscent of my own childhood, and the songs are really powerful, just like maybe opera was that we talked about in the last segment, but of course in a very different way, because this is deeply spiritual rather than just only emotional. So this comes out of the slave tradition of the Old South, and it had a couple of different pretenses. One was, of course, for church meetings, and the other would have been to give political signals to other groups of slaves or other group of abolitionists. And they've been in our repertoire here in America for the past 200 years. So I have for you, first of all, part of a TED Talk, and the entire talk is actually under your external links, but this is a modern group who continues to sing these spirituals in the old style, and you can listen to them sing because the entire talk is up there, but I'm going to put together for you just a couple minutes of this so that you can hear kind of the background of the African American spiritual from a family that has passed it down from generation to generation.
In this family. But anyway, we are a family of siblings who passing down the music and the traditions and the heritage of our father, Walter James Settles, who was a member of the Fairfield Four. And that group was started around 1921 during the Jubilee style spirituals. So what we are doing, and the music, the song that we started off with rather was a Jubilee song, and it was one of the songs that my father used to do when we were growing up in that household. And so I'm going to pick up my notes so I can see them, so I won't miss anything. But this music tradition that we are trying to preserve, the African American spirituals, are the songs of hope and quest for freedom. And the music tradition has survived over 400 years between the 17th and the 19th centuries, Africa to today, and it was created during the institution of slavery when individuals were filled with despair and shattered dreams. The music continues to speak loudly of hope and wholeness in modern times. And these songs, would you know, there's about 6,000 of the spirituals that have been identified. So it is a large body of music, American music, because it was created here in this country. And it was passed down by word of mouth from generation to generation. And so a little bit about our family. Like our father, we were born into humble circumstances. Somebody would say, "Oh, what does that mean?" You know, well, if you put us on the household income level, you know, we were kind of way down there in a sense. But and we lived in a neighborhood filled with individuals in the same circumstances, and we had the bare necessities and never knew what we didn't have. And somebody said last night, and you know, you better get to the table early or else. So if you can imagine that in a large family. So when dinner is set, you best be there. We didn't know as we grew up, that there was this huge distinction between the families that were in our neighborhoods. For instance, there was music in our family. We thought that there was music in everybody's household, but we found out that that was not true. And so, but our father thought it was important to pass down the music to us. And we believe that keeping the tradition alive is important because it is a historical account of African American existence.
And I'm going to stop that there. I think that she could explain it much better than I could because I'm not African American, but I understand the importance of this music because it also became part of my own heritage growing up in the South and how much I am inspired by and enjoy listening to this type of music. Now, when we actually go into what the book has to offer for us, the text features this group called the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And they were a group of black folks that toured around the country and sang a combination of old-time spirituals from the black tradition as well as European choir songs. And they actually made a great deal of money and were able to create a university in Nashville, Tennessee to perpetuate the ideals of their establishment. And so we have a couple of different versions here in the text. And the one thing that I want to bring to your attention is that to me, this is very much like the art song of Schubert and Schumann that we listened to earlier. Even though it's in a completely different genre, it's still of the same nature where they're telling a story, they're giving us a religious value. There's something about it that they want us to portray, that they want to tell us. And the same thing was really true of the European composers as well. Now, I have a couple of different things I want you to listen to. One is this Burley arrangement. No, actually, I want to start with the Fisk arrangement first. And this is a very old recording. It was done in the 1910s, and so it has a very tinny kind of sound to it because the sound quality is not going to be very good because it was done on a wax cylinder. So there's not a lot of low sounds in this arrangement. But let's just listen to the very beginning chorus.
Coming for the academy
Now, if we go to the chorus of the Burley arrangement, this one's a little bit later, I think it's 1917. It's still on a wax cylinder, but we hear the piano here at the beginning, so this is a little bit different. We actually start with a chorus like we did before, but there's an intro by a piano, which is a little bit different. Now, while I agree that both of these arrangements are important and they're stylized in their time, what I remember about gospels really comes from another singer, and I'm gonna play this one for you. This is what I remember. This is actually Etta James, who was an R&B singer from the 1960s, but she actually, her career went all the way to about the year 2000. Beyonce actually took over some of her most famous songs, but she did some gospel as well as her R&B and rock and roll songs. And I just want you to hear this because this is more reminiscent of the gospel that I grew up with and what seems to be more modern.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
So this kind of upbeat arrangement is something that I was more used to hearing rather than what was in the text. This entire song is in your external links if you'd like to listen to it, along with the entire TED Talk, for those of you that might be interested in more about the African spiritual. Our next composer, which I'm going to talk about real briefly, is actually John Philip Sousa, known as the March King, because he really took on the tradition of the Civil War band coming out of the Civil War to make it kind of part of our American tradition. On the 4th of July, we always have bands now that play traditional songs for us, and it was really John Philip Sousa that gave us this tradition. You would be familiar with a number of his marches. I want to show you this particular little video from the president's own Marine Band. He tells it very well here.
John Philip Sousa led the Marine Band to new heights of popularity during his tenure as leader from 1880 to 1892. It was during this era that he earned the title the March King, a well-deserved nickname that continues to this day. Of the 136 marches he composed, one has stood out above all the rest. It was composed in 1896 as Sousa sailed back home from a long European vacation. The inspiration for this march was born of a combination of homesickness, fond memories of his time as leader of the Marine Band, and his stirring recollection of the American flag flying over the White House. The resulting march became his best-known work, and in 1987 it officially became our national march, the Stars and Stripes Forever.
I don't know why my computer is acting this way today, but you get the gist of it. You understand that that's something we actually hear every 4th of July. It's a very popular march, and like he said, it became part of our national repertoire officially in 1987. So John Philip Sousa, definitely a fabric of our American lives. And finally, we have Scott Joplin, who was kind of our first real African-American composer to gain any sort of national spotlight. And he played in a style, or composed in a style called ragtime, which is a precursor to jazz. It was really called ragtime because it had what they call ragged rhythms, which is something called syncopation. It's kind of offbeat, off-kilter, just like you would think of jazz. Jazz actually happened out of ragtime, but Scott Joplin was very well known for his ragtime melodies. He went on to try to compose an opera called Treemonisha, and I have a great number from that opera on your external links. It didn't do well when he was alive, but posthumously he did quite well after the 1970s, where he was given a Pulitzer Prize for his work. His most famous piece is actually not this Maple Leaf Rag, which you can listen to. It's really nice, and again, another really nice piece for kids. What he's most well known for is this song, The Entertainer. So this is probably very familiar to you. Scott Joplin made quite a bit of money because he was very smart. Unlike Stephen Foster, who he probably learned from, that we studied a little bit earlier, he wanted royalties per playing of this rather than just selling it once and letting people do what they're going to do. So he actually did quite well for himself, and he actually put this on player piano rolls. If you remember the old-time player pianos, you would actually stick these rolls inside the front of the piano, and it had little knobs on it, and the knobs would then make the keys of the piano go and it would play automatically. So he had a number of these on player pianos, which is why it comes into the forefront of our mind when we talk about the years 1910, 1920, because this was really cool. You could have a piano that played without a musician. So Scott Joplin was very famous for his ragtime music using the player piano. So this is all we have for this unit, and we'll finish up in our final unit for the semester.